Hey everyone, welcome to module 2.3. So in this particular section, we'll talk about the anatomy of cyber attacks. It can be also referred as cyber kill chain process, right? So basically, we'll talk about the anatomy of cyber attacks over here, where you have got in certain documentations you'll find it is either a 6-step process or you would find it's a 7-step process. Right. Now the meaning of this term, which is basically cyber attacks anatomy, can be also called as cyber kill chain process, right? Where the anatomy of cyber attacks is generally referring to the different stages and the different components that is involved in the execution of a cyber intrusion. Okay, so cyber attacks generally it will contain a variety of tactics that is employed by ethical hackers, not ethical hackers, by malicious actors, right, to compromise your systems, to steal the data, disrupt your operations, or gain any sort of unauthorized access to your sensitive information, right? So there are different stages, or you can say different steps what a malicious actor can take to launch a cyber attack. Okay, so let's discuss that step by step, one by one. And as I have shown you in this particular slide, that you can see that the stages involved in certain documentations, you'll find recognitions, weaponization, delivery, then it is exploitation and installation, command and control, and then execution, right? And last is remediation. So the whole idea is in certain other documentations you can find the similar similar definitions, but with different step names, so don't get confused there, right? So although it's look different, but then the concept is same. If you find that the headers of that particular step names are different, but basically the concept are same. So recognitions, initial access, privilege escalation, lateral movement, data exfiltration or damage, covering tracks, and post-attack activities are certain stages of this particular cyber attack kill chain process. Right, so let's discuss those step by step, one by one. What does each process mean to us, right? So this is basically anatomy of cyber attack. Right, the first stage is basically called as recognitions. Right, so basically recognitions can contain multiple steps. The first step is basically information gathering. So think malicious actor, it is trying to invade a network, invade certain applications of that network. So what it will do, what is the first step that particular malicious actor would do? That first step is basically recognitions, where in that step you have got the first sub-step as information gathering, right? So what happens here is the cyber attackers generally collect information about their target, right? So collect info about the target. Now what info basically they would like to collect? The info could be IP address of the target device, it could be domain names, right? It could be employee details, like employee email ID, employee IDs, contact numbers, etc., which branch the employee or which department the employee is working for, right? And of course network design information or network configuration information. So I can say network infra details, right? Which is generally gathered by using any sort of publicly available sources, by doing some sort of social engineering, and by using some sort of scanning tools, right? So there are multiple methods what what a hacker or a cyber criminal can take to gather such information, right? That step is called as reconnaissance, information gathering step. The next step is basically called as scanning and probing, right? So basically the attackers, they normally actively scan the target's network to identify vulnerabilities, to identify, scan the target network to identify vulnerabilities, to identify any sort of open ports, or you can say, weak ports if it is available, like weak port numbers, or might be weak passwords, right? So to do that, it will use certain tools like port scanners. Even they can use like tools like Nessus. There are a lot of vulnerability scanners, right? Or they can use some tools called as network mappers. Okay. Step number 2 in this particular cyber kill chain process is basically getting initial access. Okay, getting the initial access. So to gain the initial access, you have got multiple sub-steps. The first sub-step would be exploiting vulnerabilities. So what do you mean by that? So attackers generally exploit the known vulnerabilities in softwares, in systems or applications, right? To gain access to that device. So this can include, leveraging any sort of unpatched software, right? Leveraging, any sort of unpatched software. That is the reason, it is always said that kindly regularly update your software patches whenever it is launched, right? So it is unpatched software. Misconfigured systems, right? Or if you have any sort of weak passwords, etc. So these are the possible steps, that is listed under exploiting vulnerabilities. Step number 2 would be conducting any sort of phishing and social engineering, right? This is really important, guys, to kindly focus on those terms, because this is most of the interviews you'll be finding those particular questions. Yeah. So conducting phishing and social engineering. So what does that mean is, the attackers can use certain things called as deceptive emails, right? Using deceptive emails, right? Any sort of deceptive messages, right? Or providing link for some sort of fake websites, right? Attackers normally can trick these individuals, who is receiving those, to disclose their sensitive information, such as your login credential, and that will actually enable your unauthorized access, right? So phishing and social engineering are the very, very basic tricks what the attacker takes to deceive any individual to gain the initial access of their networking component. Step number 3 is basically doing privilege escalation, right? Privilege escalation. So what do you mean by that? So first step would be basically elevating the access rights, right? So I hope you understand what is meaning of privilege, right? Privilege is kind of, the role that you have got as a user, right, to access a particular network application, network device. Whether you are a system admin, whether you are an operator, whether you are a security engineer, based on that you have the right privilege and the right authorization, right? So this particular step, which is called as elevating access rights, what happens is once the attacker gain the initial access, right, to the device or to the system, the attackers will actually attempt to gain higher privileges or administrative access, okay, which will allow them to move laterally within the network and access more sensitive data or more sensitive resources. Okay, so the whole idea is once access is gained, okay, the attacker attempts to gain a higher privilege, right, or you can say admin access, right, which will allow them to move laterally across the network and access more sensitive data and resources. It's a very, very important step. Okay, the second sub-step for this would be like exploiting weakness. So now you have gained the access to the network or to the network device, right? Now you can do exploit weakness. So exploiting misconfigurations, changing the default passwords, right, or exploiting your unsecured access controls. The attackers, they can escalate their privilege to gain deeper access within the network, right? So these are the couple of steps. So in this you can say exploiting misconfigurations, right? If you have the devices left out with default passwords, it's a very, very dangerous thing, right? Or if you have any unsecured access controls where you have not provided the right access control, or you've left it open, right? Now in that case, attackers can gain access to that component or application, right, and it can move deeper to gain the access, right? Step number 4 is basically called as lateral movement. It's one of the important step, movement. Now as the name says, lateral movement is basically moving through the network. So and that becomes your first sub step, which is basically moving through the network. So what happens here is attackers generally navigate across the network, hopping from one compromised device or system to another compromised device, and the intention is to seek valuable information of or gain access to critical systems, right? So the whole idea is moving across the network, right? Or you can say hopping from device to device to gain sensitive information. Okay, step number 2 is basically conducting credential theft and abusing, right? So in this particular process, what happens is the attackers would like to steal your credentials or tokens, which will enable the attackers to impersonate as a legitimate users, right? And that will facilitate their movement across the network while avoiding any sort of detection. So they will not be detected because they are behaving that they are legitimate users, because they have still their the original user credentials, and they are behaving as that they are legitimate. Step number 5 in this journey is basically called as data exfiltration or damage, right? As the idea is, it is all about stealing the data, damaging the data, or corrupting the data, right? So once you have the access to the device, to the applications of that device, once you have gained the credentials, then you can actually do this particular stage, right? So the first step is basically called as data theft, right? So where in this is a naturally simple English language, so you can understand that the attackers in this particular stage will extract sensitive data, such as financial information. So the whole idea is to extract sensitive data like financial information, might be personal records, right, or any sort of intellectual properties, etc. Okay, so they may exfiltrate this data for monetary gain or for some sort of ransom purposes. Think in that way, right? So step number B in this process is basically data manipulation, or you can say destruction, right? As the name says, basically in some cases the attackers may manipulate or delete the data, right, which will cause operational disruptions or financial loss to that particular target organization. Okay, step number 6 in this particular process is called as covering tracks. Okay, in this particular covering tracks, as the name says, the first sub-step would be erasing evidence. So once you have gain access to the data, you have understood or copied the data to your local device, so might be you have done your job, then you have to cover the tracks so that you are not caught. So the first step is basically erasing evidence, right? So in that particular process, what happens is that attackers, they would attempt to erase or alter the logs, because your network will have logs maintained by the devices, and the logs might be exported to some sort of logging servers, and attackers don't want that to happen. So it might be they will be attempting to erase those logs or alter the logs, right? Deleting, alter, or you can say erase logs, right? Then you can say deleting any sort of evidence that is left out, right? And they will try to cover their tracks to evade any sort of detection, and they would hinder the forensic investigation team as well. Okay, step number B is basically called as maintaining access. So in this particular stage, as the name says, that the attacker would like to establish something called as establish backdoor or hidden access points, right? Establish backdoors or hidden access points that will actually enable the attackers to maintain a persistence within the compromised system for future exploitation. All right, so the last but not the list is the 7th step, which is basically called as post-attack activities. So in that, you have got the first sub-step as incident response, where in this step what happens is the victims would normally engage in incident response process, investigating the attack, containing the damage, okay, and recover the affected systems, right? So the victims will engage in attack investigation and recover the affected systems. Step number B in this stage would be your conducting forensic analysis. So here what happens is the forensic team would naturally do their forensic analysis job, where it is used to conduct any sort of determining the attack scope. So how far the attack has actually been escalated or been persisted in the network, right? How many devices were affected, what all applications are actually been accessed, and how much amount of data loss has taken place. That is called as attack scope. The impact and what are the different methods that attackers have used, right, which will actually aid in strengthening security measures and preventing any sort of future breaches if it can happen, right? So this is the process basically of understanding the anatomy of your cyber attacks, also called a cyber kill chain process. So understanding this cyber attacks is very crucial for network security engineers, for your organization to develop, a robust security strategies, to implement effective defense mechanism, and to train the persons to detect, prevent, and respond to any sort of cyber threats. And it should be educated, right, to a lot of cybersecurity team, so that they know the various stages of the attack life cycle. So with this in mind, I think it is very clear to all of you. I will see you in the next module. So the next module will discuss regarding the introduction to network firewalls. So I thank you for watching. I'll see you in the next video.